Man, old shit's cool. Am I the only one that played a game called General Chaos back in the days when games were just a handful of moving colors and bleeps and bloops coming out of a tiny screen? I loved that game. Here's how it played. You pick a handful of soldiers with different skills and you command them around a small map dotted with various hazards. The controller was a glorified mouse pointer, and you weren't in control so much as you told people where to go and what to do, and if they felt like it, they might actually do those things well. The cartoony graphics and Saturday morning cartoon soundtrack was what sold it for me, but there was something infinitely fun about being a god and moving around little live chess pieces and watching your orders get carried out. There wasn't anything like it on the Sega Channel. Oh, remember that? Yeah, it was like the coolest thing until Netflix did it with movies, but Sega Channel was basically the final death throes of Genesis. Once all the peripherals like the Sega CD and the Genesis 32 proved to be failures with no one releasing games on those platforms due to poor adoption rates, Sega said, hey, put all our shit on this server and share it to customers over this TV cable thing and charge per month. And they did. They actually created a peripheral that would download the games from your cable provider, and on a monthly basis, they rotated between selections of like 100 games. It was Netflix before Netflix was a sperm in its daddy's balls, okay? I was an early adopter, and by adopter I mean my best friend had it and I would spend the night at his house and play Sega Channel all night long. Alright. Man, I look forward to those nights all month because it was like a bonding experience, It's how I introduced him to games like Shining Force, and he would have never played it otherwise, and since then he went on to play damn near every game in the series. But wait, what was the point of this? Oh yeah, General Chaos, right, okay, so after General Chaos, there was this series of games I never played until recently called Commandos. They were like your boy General Chaos, except so much extra. The only problem is that the game felt a bit too much like a puzzle, and not enough like improvisation and tactics were deciding your fate. Commandos always felt so trial and error. It was clunky to learn at first, but once you got the hang of it, the game still found new and wonderful ways of fucking you. Then like 50 years or so passed and we got Shadow Tactics, and all the sins of the previous game were forgiven as we, the player base, drove nails of love through the developer's palms. Then after about 500 words of rambling, I checked my email, and it was then that I realized that I, Strat-Edgy, had made it as a YouTuber. The email read as follows. Dear Strat-Edgy, apparently this spooky season has not ended yet, as Alder Blood's premiere is coming early 2020, and I already have a preview copy for you. That's it, boys. This channel has made it. Yes, I may not be able to break 5,000 views on my Veterans video. Yes, YouTube has been driving me to have high blood pressure, tachycardia, and most likely a slew of other heart-related diseases, but in the end, it was worth it. I now get free games. Who needs a working heart, huh? Who needs a functional, stress-free brain when you can get free games? I went and checked out the games page, and I honestly wasn't expecting much, but the costuming of the characters reminded me of Bloodborne, and so did the monsters. The art style and atmosphere was giving me serious Darkest Dungeon vibes, and this is when I knew that I was going to be trying this game. I mean, I was going to try its brains out. So is it any good? Well, let's dig in, shall we? The game seems pretty basic at first, and it kind of is. There are 3 layers of gameplay. The first layer deals with combat, as it's the first thing you're likely introduced to. Combat has 2 phases, stealth and exposed. Every action that you take outside of basic movement costs stamina points. Now, if you move within your movement range, you don't use stamina. This allows you to ambush creatures from cover, then sneak back into the bushes before they can do anything. But if you run out of stamina, well, you're stunned and you must take a whole turn to recover. This leaves you exposed and can very easily result in death. The name of the game is to stay out of sight and kill enemies as their backs are turned to you, as a surprise backstab stuns monsters and allows you to perform a ritual to banish them or press your attack until they're dead. But if you're exposed and an enemy sees you, this is where the game logic takes a bit of a leap in the wrong direction and right off a cliff. Whenever you move into sight range of an enemy, you're stopped in your tracks, which causes you to lose any stamina you spent on the move, even if that move hasn't completed, and at times allows the enemy to attack you before you can even continue your move. This can cause hilarious situations like this one, where I'm stun locked after moving only 3 feet because I'm getting constantly interrupted by this monster. I don't have a problem with the game pausing to tell me that I've been seen. This is actually good design. It allows me to correct my move when an enemy is exposed from fog of war. What irritates me is the loss of stamina, only because it doesn't make any logical sense. Imagine how shitty it would be every time you were trying to sneak past someone you didn't want to talk to, and you passed out every time they saw you, as if the power of their stare was enough to be exhausting. I'm not making an argument that game logic must be the same as real life logic. I don't believe that, but the game's logic must be explained somehow in universe. Like, what do we lose stamina for when we are exposed? Is this some kind of power that the monster has? Also, it's never explained that this will happen in the beginning in the tutorials. It's never explained. So when it happens the first time, you're caught off guard. Then to make matters worse, some creatures have 2 states of awareness. So you get in situations where you get seen and lose your movement points. Then if you try to move again, you get seen a second time and become exhausted just trying to hide in a bush. It's real dumb. In combat, being careful is the key to your survival, so if you don't move too far ahead all at once, you take small steps forward, don't be too aggressive, and only attack when you know you can win, the game is far too easy, so the fights just feel like a roadblock to get to the thing you really want to do. And not to mention, if you're playing the game the way the developers seem to want you to, you'll be spending plenty of turns waiting in a bush until an enemy is close enough to either ambush or snipe from a distance, and since there's no percentage to hit and no chance you can miss, why would you play any other way that might have you playing the encounter over again? So the game is trying to tell you to be careful by dogpiling a bunch of systems on the player that put them at a disadvantage if they try to play aggressive. I can't help but feel like if our characters were worth more, and when they leveled they actually got stronger, that I would feel a lot more tense about encounters and wouldn't be so aggressive naturally instead of feeling like I am being forced into it, because I wouldn't want to take the chance of losing a valuable character, and that is sort of the thing I hate about combat. Not the fact that it doesn't make sense, but more like the sense that I am being railroaded into playing the game the way that the developers wanted me to in order to save characters who are disposable and I don't really care about. I know that it's okay for designer to design a game to play only a certain way, I get it, but I feel like the games that are successful are the ones that persuade you to play a certain way, instead of ramming the playstyle down your throat. Take Dark Souls and Thief for example. They persuade you to play a certain way not by penalizing you heavily for a certain playstyle, but by nature of rewarding the player for playing the game a certain way. They don't beat them over the head with the stick for trying to do something different. Now, I might need to explain that shit for a minute because I can already hear the frantic clacking of keys in the comments section screeching at me about Dark Souls resetting your progress and shit. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about playstyles. You could play as a shield man hiding behind it and shelling up until you get in your one attack, but because of the way stamina works in the game, it's a slow process because you almost never have stamina to swing your weapon. And it's tense because you're usually on the verge of getting your guard broken. But if you learn how to use magic, or you're rolling and rolling and rolling, you feel like a god, because you could straight up murder house enemies. The Thief has the same feeling in that you could technically go through the easier difficulties killing everyone with arrows, but that won't get you through the harder difficulties. And those difficulties hide the best parts of the game. Those difficulties force you to traverse parts of the level you may have never seen otherwise. I can't stress enough how satisfying it is to go through a level having never been seen, not knocking out anyone, yet still cleaning out the entire place of its valuables. It's almost as if the limitations need to be self-imposed to a point, where the game needs to make us believe that we made the choice to play that way, even though the actual case is that the game is cleverly nudging us in the direction that it wants us to play in. So the way I see combat is that I have to be afraid to lose my guys, which I'm not, for the most part, because I could just buy new ones to replace them if they die. Not to mention that you basically have to try to die to lose anyone. The combat encounters just don't feel like they have any stakes. So I'm bored as a result. I could see this getting fixed in a couple of ways. First, make a corruption meter. Yeah, have a meter that tells me how close my guys are to going batshit crazy. Then, show me how much each of my actions is corrupting my guys, because apparently fighting also increases it an unknown amount. Then, if you give me a way to mitigate the corruption, then you could have a leveling system that is actually meaningful. The way I see it, levels mean nothing, because the characters are expendable. If you go too far in the other direction, you make them too valuable, Then you get the darkest dungeon problem of losing a character near the end of the game, when you end up feeling like you need to restart the whole game because there's no way you're going to get another god roll, not to mention running a character who is level 1 through a level 6 dungeon and expecting them to come out alive. But here's the thing, this game already has a sacrifice mechanic that would alleviate some of that nonsense, because when a character is sacrificed, you bolster another character. You get to transfer most of that experience to the new guy. Now, you might be saying, if you lose basically nothing when a character dies, what's the point? Well, I would agree with you. That's sort of the problem with the game at this moment. If the characters had varying stats and skills, instead of items determining success or failure, losing a character would still lose you their skills, but you could at least level up their stats and hope you get skills relevant or close to the ones that you already had. Right now, the characters just don't mean anything. The combat, as a result, have no stakes, and nothing feels like it means anything. The second layer is camp management. Now, there are a couple aspects to this: resting, sacrificing, crafting loadouts for hunters, leveling up, bartering, and hiring new hunters. This is also where you get to assign jobs to hunters. It's all rather simple, and it doesn't require a whole lot of thought. Do you want to craft something? Scavenge for parts, then rest and assign some hunters to craft it. Want to hire some people, but don't have the money? Scavenge for the silver and hire someone new. The systems interact with each other, which is nice, but it's all surface level. It's a single level of interaction. And most of these problems that I mentioned, they're all solved by scavenging. Crafting, for instance, requires that you scavenge for specific parts. You can only scavenge for those parts up to a certain number each day, depending on how many characters you have set to scavenge. The more you assign, the higher the yield, but doing so also puts you at risk of accidents or ambush. So it is best to set some characters as guards, thus reducing your daily yield. The problem is twofold. Accident damage is easily mitigated and doesn't cause any permanent injuries, and ambushes are easy, and every time I had to fight in one, it was exactly the same map, layout, and enemies. And each time I had to do the fight, I found it easier and easier to the point it was an absolute snorefest. So there's not much keeping you from scavenging endlessly, but I have a solution to this problem as well. Corruption should stack when resting in one place for too long. See, you don't gather corruption on the first night in this scenario, but on the subsequent nights, the darkness can gather, and that makes it so that the hunters have to be constantly on the move, which makes this all a delicate balancing act between having enough food and gathering resources. Also, on the individual resources themselves, your crew rarely grows beyond 3 or 4 hunters if you're smart, because food isn't exactly precious, but there's actually no point in having a crew that's any larger than that. When you sacrifice a character, the only thing you lose is the charm they wore for some reason. Like, are the charms cursed and can't be removed? No. It's an arbitrary reason, it seems. But moving on. So you end up getting a stockpile of weapons early on, which means you don't need a lot of resources to keep stocked up. It gets a bit more important later on in game when you start running across really powerful ranged items, but even then, you don't really need that many, and the really powerful items aren't consumables, so once you make them, you don't have to keep making them again and again. Charms are nice, and they are the one item type that I could see proving very valuable if the developers start making them more powerful, but in their current state, they don't really add much of a value. If they boosted that value, that would make the charms incredibly valuable, and if you made them permanent on whatever character equips them instead of being swappable, then by extension, the character becomes valuable, especially if you were to introduce monster ingredients via like a Witcher game. Valuable charms require rare ingredients, therefore hunters then become valuable, and I is sad when I lose one. Know what I mean? Thankfully, this is not where the most interesting part of the game takes place. That is layer 3. The third layer is the story and atmosphere, and this is where the game really shines. I don't want to ruin it for you, so I'll explain the background. You take the role of a hunter. You are at one with the darkness that consumes the heart of beasts, and as a result, you're given powers like the ability to sense monsters, banish them, and so on. But this darkness is corrupting you, and slowly turning you into a beast. So you know the longer you stare into the void, the more it stares back at you, Nietzsche type shit you read in college. Well, the art style contributes heavily to the atmosphere, as does the music, which is typically foreboding, plotting, rhythm accented by a sort of shrill wind instrument that sounds like some horrible, monstrous bird dying. As a hunter, you've been exiled from the cities, as you were essentially a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. So you wander a dead, dark, draped land in search of God's f***ing corpse. The corpse of God is apparently causing the darkness in the land and monsters to spawn, so not only is God dead, but he seems pretty pissed off too. Save for a few people, no one will speak to you, and when they do, it seems they are using you to achieve their own ends. There's some political intrigue, family warring, it's all fairly decent stuff. But there's a big problem. The story is hidden behind less than stellar gameplay that seems to be using a turn-based tactical combat system in a way it wasn't meant to be used, and the end result is sort of boring. And camp management seems tacked on, if I'm being honest. There's not a whole lot of depth to it. That's not to say that Outer Blood is a bad game, far from it. I'm sure there's a good game under there, but it needs some major tweaks. Most of all to the combat, which right now is boring because it railroads you into one style of gameplay. Stealth, end, turn, stealth, end, turn, fight. Now let's talk about bugs. Since this is a game that is charging money, we should talk about them. I ran into my first bug after I realized the game had no autosave feature and had to play through the first 2 hours of the game again. Autosave is such an easy win nowadays, and I'm puzzled why it isn't included. It saves people like me from ourselves. I mean, in the last 6 months, I have inherited a family of a hot girlfriend and her 6 and 8 year old who are now our 6 and 8 year old. They're wonderful. They aren't the problem. The problem is, I try to get home to play games before they get home because I can concentrate on them completely, and when they come home from school and work respectively, I just want to hang out with them. In fact, the moment I hear the door alarm beep, I exit out of whatever game I'm playing to go see them. The problem is, sometimes I forget to save. Now, I know what you're saying, that's a real niche feature request, my dude, and I agree, yes it is. That is until you realize every feature is created to solve a number of problems that many people will have, like, let's say, power outages, game crashes, or just plain old forgetfulness like yours truly. You can see that this might be a problem. Then, as you add in the fact that even when autosaves weren't a thing, I would constantly lose precious hours of my life in Gothic 1 because I forgot to save and a lizard ate my ass. Now, can I ask you a favor? Just add an autosave feature, or take a note from developers of Shadow Tactics and add a "you haven't saved in X minutes" timer. That way, people like me who get into a state I can only describe as tunnel vision get saved from their own dumbass selves. And now back to the error I discovered. Yeah, I was just finishing up the tutorial fight and was getting some rest at the camp when progression just broke. No matter how long I rested or what tasks I assigned while resting, I was unable to continue the game. It was easily fixed by reloading the game, but experiencing an infinite loop bug this early in the game did not inspire confidence. But I pushed on. I really wanted to play the game as it seemed like something that was right up my alley. See, I brought up all those other games before for a reason. While Alder Blood may remind me of Bloodborne and Darkest Dungeon, this game reminds me most of a turn-based version of Commandos and Shadow Tactics. Everything started out solid as I went to fight in the second battle, but as you could see, the game bugged out on me again and wouldn't let me change characters or end my turn. The only way to fix it was to exit the game and reload to save again. It was an inauspicious start to my journey with the game. And the bugs didn't stop there, however. I encountered this same bug several times, which was fixed by saving and reloading. But each time I did that, I got cold sweats thinking I might have ruined my save game and might have to start back an hour or so. So what I usually did was just restart the fight to be safe from the beginning. Which, by the 5th time this happened, really started to get on my nerves. There's little things in this game, like in the mission where I'm supposed to get an artifact and leave, the game requires that I hit a specific point in order to trigger a cutscene. And it has to be on that specific point, because even though I went around it and literally passed the goddamn artifact as I was on my way out of the level, the game still wanted me to backtrack to trigger a cutscene. So, yay. But one of my main frustrations is corruption. In the description of the codex it says the following about corruption. Corruption can be built up by attacking monsters with weapons and taking damage. I didn't know this until I had sacrificed a couple of hunters already and decided to find out how exactly this mechanic worked, because I thought it would add when sleeping and sometimes it wouldn't, but it seemed like every time I did a mission, my level raised by 200. It's frustrating because the game opens up by teaching you about the stealth mechanics, but it also focuses heavily on combat, which sends the player the wrong message, or at least a mixed message, because none of the tutorial pop-ups mention corruption, or how it works in relation to combat. So I thought the best way through the game was to pop out of the bushes, kill enemies while their backs are turned, but because corruption will kill your character when you have to sacrifice them, you're led to believe that fighting is the wrong choice. What you should be doing is avoiding fights altogether. At least that's what I thought. So I tried that, and I ended up having to kill one enemy in a map and got attacked by another. So it was no big deal, I thought. I didn't f up too bad, so maybe the game would take mercy on me. Nope. The game still added 200 corruption after the battle. I was pissed because hiding from enemies to me was the far more boring option, and because I didn't perfect stealth the damn thing, I got penalized the same as if I had killed everything in the map. At least that's what I thought. I decided to go digging online to see how the mechanic works, and turns out no matter what you do, your hunters will gain 200 corruption every time you do a mission, so there's no way to save them. You can only stretch them out by not engaging in combat. The problem I have with this is it's far cheaper to stretch the hunters out, but by doing that, you're forced to forego combat, which makes the game even more boring because all you end up doing in this scenario is waiting for the enemy to turn their backs. And because the camera does shit like this every turn, it just makes the process of stealthing annoying. So basically, you can't get attached to characters because they'll die. You can't get around it. They just will, and that's all there is to it. In Darkest Dungeon, you can get a character through most of the content without fear of losing them if you're smart. Darkest Dungeon is a great analog to this game because it has pretty much the same similar content and systems. So stress is a big mechanic which will eventually render your characters useless if it gets too out of control, and in Alder's Blood, corruption outright turns your characters into raving beasts that attack anything around them. In Darkest Dungeon, you can mitigate this by sending a character to a stress reducer for a day or so. This makes it so you don't have to lose that character that you've invested so much time and currency into, but there's no such luck in Outer Blood. No matter what you do, all your characters will eventually die or be sacrificed, which means you can't get attached to any character in a game. And because the leveling system is a joke, and at the end of the day fairly meaningless, losing a character doesn't mean much, especially if you have enough money to buy replacements. And to top it all off, you can mitigate losing the experience point gain that a character would lose upon death by simply sacrificing them and bolstering their replacement. So basically the corruption system is more of an annoyance than a hindrance, and results in busy work. There's also very little in the way of resource management. Food is the one resource that you need to keep going, and if you run out, your characters start to lose health every day until they die. Now, this could be interesting if food played into your role as a hunter, or if scavenging for food was some sort of active event like in, I don't know, Oregon Trail, but it's not. See, there's an ambush and accident system in place to dissuade you from resting in dangerous places too much to stockpile food. This system is fairly simple. If you're scavenging with clumsy hunters, accidents can happen, and those hunters will lose some of their HP as a result. If you're ambushed, you have to fight in the same fucking fight over and over again, which is not challenging and will put you to sleep. That is supposed to prevent you from stockpiling. Issue is, if you're in a town or at home base, you can rest as many times as you want, and not only will you not be affected by corruption, as far as I could tell, but your accident and ambush chance is absolute zero. So again, food management becomes mindless busy work. Every once in a while, you'll travel back to the crown to scavenge for food, and that's about how much you thought it takes. Does food equal less than 200? Go to 10 line and scavenge. Would I recommend the game? Not in its current state, to be honest. It doesn't do enough to be interesting, and what it does doesn't innovate enough to be different. It could be a great game, but it has a long way to go before that can happen, and I truly hope it does because the ideas present in the game have a lot of potential, and I look forward to playing that future game should it ever come out. And having said that, I'm going to go back to Doom to get my butthole ready for Doom Eternal. This has been a rant from Strat-Edgy, and now that you heard it, go play some games.